Chapter 58, Painful Awakening. Harry awoke from a very deep sleep. He woke up slowly, almost painfully. His throat was dry, and his eyelids were as heavy as lead, aching against the summer sunlight that surrounded him. He lay in his bed, exhausted, waiting to hear Aunt Petunia's annoyed tapping on his bedroom door, Uncle Vernon's shouts, Dudley's loud complaints about his diet, or even the sound of a car on the street outside number 4 Privet Drive. But for some reason, he heard nothing but the chirping of birds. Feeling slowly returned to his limbs, a thick, sluggish sensation. He began to realize he was lying in a very comfortable bed, covered by a soft blanket. Thinking that he was probably at Hogwarts, he opened his eyes with a tremendous effort. He didn't recognize the room he was in. A sense of panic started to rise as he fumbled for his glasses on the bedside table, but they weren't there. He got out of the bed, his whole body aching as if he'd been hit by a dozen bludgers, and his bare feet met a soft rug on the floor. He stood up and immediately fell like a stone, the rug cushioning his fall slightly. His legs were numb and refused to obey him, as if he'd forgotten how to walk. He groaned in pain and stayed on the floor, confused and helpless. A sliver of a memory pricked somewhere at the back of his mind, but it was as if his head was filled with black water that prevented him from grasping the memory and understanding what was going on. He didn't know how long he lay there. Maybe he fell asleep or lost consciousness. The next thing he noticed was a commotion around him and strong arms pulling him from the rug and putting him back in the bed. Even without his glasses, he recognized Ron and Hermione hovering over him, looking extremely worried for some reason. He found himself smiling at them instinctively, but when he tried to say something, he realized he couldn't form a sentence. They spoke to him, but he couldn't understand the words, as if he had forgotten how to speak English. Suddenly, he remembered the three of them at Hogwarts, alone in the great, dark castle. And then a dam broke in his mind, and memories flooded him. The graveyard, Voldemort, Cedric, the Potter family home, his parents, Christmas, the visions that plagued him. A figure that looked exactly like him, deceiving him, hurting him, pushing him into darkness. Voldemort's memories. He couldn't breathe. It was only when a cold, bitter liquid was poured down his throat and cool, soothing mists entered his airways did he realize he was screaming and writhing in Ron's grip. A powerful sense of peace replaced the terror, and he sank into a stupor. When he woke up again, he felt only a sweet tranquility. The memories came back to him again, but this time they were blocked by a bright, calming fog that filled his head. He was back in the comfortable bed, but now it was night. He looked around drowsily. A man in wizard's robes was sleeping in an armchair next to the bed, his spectacles slipping down his nose and reflecting the moonlight that entered through the window. On his other side, a woman was sleeping next to him in the bed, covered by a patchwork quilt. Harry carefully touched his mother's shoulder to make sure she was real. She woke up the second he touched her and immediately sat up, pulling him into a tight embrace. "Harry, my Harry." Shocked, he realized she was sobbing. He remembered a dream he'd had where they fought a giant serpent with a man's face together, and began to realize that it hadn't been a dream at all. On his other side, Harry's father woke up and moved to the edge of the bed. The moment Harry's mother released him, he handed him his glasses. Harry remembered him being tortured, bleeding, his glasses broken, and knew that this, too, had really happened, even though it felt as if it was something he'd seen in a film. James looked surprised when he leaned forward and hugged him. "Who are you, and what have you done with Harry?" he joked, while hugging his son back tightly. "Oh, James, that's not funny," Lily said, still wiping away her tears. Harry didn't really understand what they were talking about. Everything around him was very surreal in the moonlight. His parents, this room, which he now noticed was full of his belongings. So he organized the words in his head and finally managed to ask in a hoarse, unfamiliar voice, "Are we dead?" "No, probably not," his father replied, then exchanged a look with his mother. "Do you remember anything?" "Yes," Harry replied. The soothing fog prevented him from reacting as he had the last time he woke up, but the memories were there. Not very well. It's sort of like it was a dream, or like I saw it in a film or something. His parents looked like they didn't know how to react. Harry realized they were afraid to say anything because they didn't know exactly how much he remembered. "What happened to Voldemort?" he asked them, looking at his mother. "Were you really there when I fought him? I remember him turning small and shriveled, but after that—" "We hoped you could tell us," his father admitted. "After you defeated him, he collapsed in the great hall, and something that looked like black smoke came out of his mouth and dissipated. It was a rather gruesome sight. It was awful enough to scare off all the Death Eaters and his other supporters who had taken over Hogwarts. It seems that they, at least, think he's gone for good." Harry looked at his mother, and she said, "The last thing I saw was you standing over him. I don't know what happened after that." Harry tried to probe his consciousness, searching for something he couldn't quite define. He tried to recreate the feeling he'd sometimes felt since last summer, and especially strongly at Christmas, as if he wasn't alone in his head, as if someone was watching him. But he couldn't. "I don't know," he said when he realized they were expecting him to say something. "I know I'm me, but I think he'll always be a part of me somehow. I think as long as I'm alive, something of him will live on." They looked at him with great concentration, and he felt the need to add, "I don't want you to worry, but that's the truth." "We know, sweetheart," his mother said, "and we know there's a part of him inside you. Dumbledore thought that's how Voldemort took you over." Her husband completed the words she couldn't say. "We thought we'd lost you forever," she continued, trembling, and hugged Harry again. "We're so happy you're back with us." "It makes sense," Harry found himself saying after she let go of him. "It takes very strong magic to create a Horcrux, something like the magic you used the night he tried to kill us, and it probably isn't hard to scrape another piece of soul off someone who has already split their soul into 6 parts." His parents stared at him in astonishment while he spoke. He, too, felt surprised when he realized what he'd said, but he knew it was completely true. "You know about the Horcruxes?" his father asked him. "Yes," Harry replied. "I don't know how, I just know." He stopped there and didn't add that he thought he also knew exactly how to create them, as if he had done it himself once, a long time ago. "What else do you know?" "James, let him rest," Lily said to her husband. "No, it's all right," Harry said, interested to find out what other improbable knowledge he'd managed to draw from his mind. He had a feeling he had a lot of knowledge that a 15-year-old boy shouldn't have, and certainly not him, who had never been a particularly good student. He looked at his father, and a thought popped into his head. "The prophecy," he said, feeling pleased with himself, as if he had solved a puzzle. "What did you think you would get by destroying it?" He felt satisfaction at the look of astonishment on his parents' faces. For a brief moment it felt like a game, but his parents didn't look amused. Then he realized how he knew all these things. Voldemort's memories and knowledge had been absorbed into him. All 3 of them realized it, but didn't say it. "Well, I was fed up with the Order wasting time, with keeping it safe instead of dealing with things that really matter," his father explained. "Especially since I don't believe prophecies are real, they're just self-fulfilling." Harry realized, in fact, maybe he had known it all along, that the prophecy was what had brought Voldemort to their home on Halloween night 15 years ago. He thought he was coming to get rid of the wizard who would one day equal him, but got the opposite result. He pondered this for a long time, and only realized he was doing so when his parents began to get up. Outside the window, songbirds began to chirp. Dawn was breaking. A familiar tapping sounded on the window. Harry got out of bed carefully, this time making sure his legs were stable before standing up, and went to open the window. Hedwig flew in and landed on his shoulder, starting to nibble his ear affectionately. Harry stroked her feathers with appreciation. "Wait," he said to his parents as they started talking about breakfast and updating everyone that Harry had woken up. "The end of the prophecy. I never heard it." That is to say, Harry had never heard it. His parents exchanged worried glances, as if they were debating wordlessly whether they should tell him. Finally, his mother sat down on the bed again and said, "The end of the prophecy says, the one will not live while the other survives. That's the reason it was so important for Dumbledore and us to hide it, and why members of the Order were tasked with guarding it. We were afraid that if Voldemort heard about it, he—" She trailed off, but Harry understood what she was trying to say. Something inside him told him she was right. If Voldemort had known that's what the prophecy said, he really wouldn't have stopped until Harry was dead. But he didn't tell his parents that. He went to wash up in the bathroom outside his room, and his parents told him they would be in the kitchen. His mind felt disconnected from his body in the unfamiliar space, and the warm water running over his skin felt strange, unnatural. The subject of the prophecy continued to bother him, but he couldn't explain why. It felt as if hidden gears were turning at the back of his head and processing the information, but he couldn't get there to understand what was happening. Suddenly, he wondered how long he had been asleep, and how he would feel when those calming mists, which were still hovering inside his head, disappeared and left him to deal with all the thoughts that lurked behind them. He got dressed in the clothes that were waiting for him outside the bath, his old clothes that gave him a sense of comfort, and then wiped the steam from the mirror to see his reflection. He barely recognized the boy who looked back at him, and at first it was almost frightening. He looked very mature, tall, his shoulders broader, and a few black bristles sprouted on his cheek. He leaned into the mirror to get a better look at them, and then looked into his eyes. Something about his eyes had changed, even though he couldn't say exactly what. He left the bathroom and found the stairs to the ground floor. He examined the house as he walked, realizing it looked empty and untouched, as if no one really lived there. There was hardly any furniture in the hallway or the entrance hall, except for a few photos on a chest of drawers. He stopped to look at them. There was a photo of his parents on their wedding day, and a photo of a black-haired baby riding a toy broomstick over a green lawn. It took him a moment to realize it was him. There was a photo of his parents with Emily on what looked like a family trip. That photo didn't move like the others. And a photo of his parents with Lupin and Sirius when they were at Hogwarts. In the center of the display was a photo of the 4 Potter family members in front of a decorated Christmas tree. Harry picked it up to look at it closely. His father was wrapping an arm around his wife's waist, ruffling Emily's hair and occasionally laughing at someone outside the frame, and his mother smiled at him and his sister with pure happiness. He himself stood in the photo in awkward embarrassment, looking young and a little stunned. The photo was taken at Grimmauld Place last Christmas, just before the events that changed their lives completely, and it was the first family photo he had ever been in. After a long examination of the photo, he began to smell breakfast, and he realized he was extremely hungry. He put the photo down and followed the smell to the house's kitchen. It overlooked a large backyard and the open countryside beyond. In the growing morning light, the sea twinkled on the horizon. Harry's parents were busy with breakfast by the stove, while a black-haired girl in a tracksuit sat by the table, yawning. The moment Harry entered, she jumped and threw herself at him, giving him a tight hug. It was only then that he realized it was Emily. She too had matured a lot since the last time he had seen her. "I was worried you weren't coming back," she admitted to him awkwardly after the hug. "You're out of luck," he joked in reply, and she gave him a radiant smile. Plates laden with eggs, toast, and bacon floated to the table. Harry ate with an appetite. Only after a few minutes did he realize everyone was looking at him and suddenly felt embarrassed. All 3 were smiling at him. For the first time, he noticed his father was wearing a plum-colored robe with a silver W embroidered on the lapel. Harry had seen someone wearing a robe like that before. "The color doesn't suit me, I know," his father said when he noticed what he was looking at. "Are you in the Wisengamot?" Harry asked, not sure if it was a joke. "I am as of 2 weeks ago," his father said, pouring himself more coffee. Griselda Marchbanks retired last month, so there was an opening. Voldemort's takeover really took a toll on her. I can't blame her for wanting to take some time off. Aren't you a bit young? Harry asked, remembering the old wizards and witches who had been present at his hearing in the summer. Very, his father replied. I almost wasn't elected, but I made a good impression on everyone in the battle at Hogwarts. Besides, after the number Umbridge did on the ministry in her time, as minister requires all hands on deck to clean things up. We're still scrambling, and she, as you can probably guess, was in the wind the moment Voldemort was defeated. The mention of the battle made something twist in Harry's stomach. His appetite disappeared. Desperate not to think about it now, he said, "Wait, last month. How long have I been asleep?" 6 weeks, his mother said. I don't think you can call that sleep, his father said. Harry tried to come to terms with the fact that he had been unconscious for 6 weeks. In fact, one could say he hadn't really been conscious since Christmas. He had lost more than half a year of his life. Harry, his mother said worriedly. He realized he was staring at his family, but without really seeing them. Blurred memories rose and floated in him, things he didn't want to remember. I'm sorry, he said, emotions overwhelming him. I'm sorry you had to go through all that. Don't be sorry, his mother said, leaning across the table to hold his hand tightly. It wasn't your fault. I know you probably don't feel that way, but it wasn't your fault. It wasn't you. Remember that. Harry nodded, tears choking him. He didn't dare shed them in front of his family. As sometimes happened, his mother spoke as if she knew exactly what he was thinking and feeling. To his relief, everyone's attention was diverted from him when there was a tap on the kitchen window. Harry's father went to open it for the owl carrying a copy of Thedley Prophet. He scanned the headlines on the front page and noticed Harry looking at him. Nothing interesting, he muttered, but tucked the paper into his robe pocket anyway. Harry didn't argue. He decided he didn't want to know what was written there anyway. He just wanted to be with his family and friends and forget about all the other things he didn't want to think about. Were Ron and Hermione here? He asked, remembering he had seen them the first time he woke up. They came to visit you every day since you came home, his mother told him. We sent them a letter this morning. They'll come as soon as you're ready to see them. I'm ready, Harry said immediately, eager to see his friends. Padfoot and Moony and Tonks are also dying to see you, his father said, but only if it's okay. It's okay, Harry said without hesitation. I want to see them too. The first to step out of the fireplace in the Potters' living room was Sirius, as if he'd just been sitting around and waiting to hear he was allowed to come. Harry barely recognized him at first. He looked tanned and healthy, with no trace left of the skeletal look he had when he escaped from Azkaban. He still looked older than his age, his face etched with early wrinkles and his black hair speckled with grey. But he looked very much like the charming best man in Harry's parents' wedding photos. He pulled Harry into a bone-crushing hug and only let him go when he complained he couldn't breathe, settling for ruffling his hair affectionately, his eyes looking very moist. You, Harry started to ask in light of his godfather's changed appearance. I'm a free man, Sirius announced happily. You won't have to send me parcels of chicken to the cave anymore. The next time green flames roared in the fireplace, Hermione stepped out. Harry hadn't had a chance to open his mouth before she threw herself at him with a hug. Hermione, I'm all right, he said awkwardly as he felt tears against his neck. He barely noticed that Ron had also appeared there until he wrapped his arms around both of them and managed to lift them off the floor with impressive strength. This made Hermione laugh and wipe away her tears, something Harry would never have been able to do. Good thing you're awake, mate, Ron told him brightly, patting his shoulder with a large hand. I already know Quidditch through the ages by heart. Hermione was reading it to you every day. Harry smiled gratefully at his friends. Like him, they too had matured a lot, and it was strange to see them like that. It made him remember again that dream that was not a dream, where the three of them were hiding from Voldemort at Hogwarts together. But he forced himself to push the memory aside and focus on the reunion. The next time the flue lit up, a young woman with short brown hair stumbled into the living room and used Sirius's shoulder to keep from falling onto the rug. Harry barely recognized Tonks. The only reminder of her unusual appearance, as he remembered it, was the torn jeans and the pink ends of her hair. "Watch her, Harry," she said to him kindly and hugged him. He had always liked Tonks, but hadn't expected her to show up there too. But if he thought it was strange that she was part of this reunion, no one else seemed to think so. The last to appear was Professor Lupin. Tonks made way for him, and he squeezed Harry's shoulder affectionately. "Good to have you back with us, Harry. How are you feeling?" "I'm fine," Harry replied automatically, too excited by the event to really think about it. "Now are you finally going to tell us how you defeated Voldemort in the end?" Emily cut into the touching reunion. "You kept saying you'd tell us when Harry woke up." "You didn't tell them about the Horcruxes?" Harry asked his parents. "The what?" Ron interrupted. "They don't tell us anything," Emily complained to her brother, as the adults in the room looked hesitant to reply. "If you won't tell them, I will," Harry announced. All right, his father gave in, "but we'd better get settled. This is going to be a long story." The Potter family and their guests settled on the back terrace of the house, which overlooked the coastline and white cliffs rising above the waves. The summer morning sun was warm against the humid sea breeze, and Harry's father summoned a tray laden with cool bottles of butterbeer. Harry, his sister, and his friends listened, fascinated, to the story of how the marauders and Tonks found a locket encrusted with emeralds in a cave on the coastline after defeating an army of Inferi, and how Dumbledore told them about the existence of Voldemort's Horcruxes, sending them on a mission to find and destroy all six in order to defeat Voldemort once and for all. Harry felt a growing admiration for his father and his friends as he listened to how they broke into Gringotts to steal a Horcrux that was hidden in Bellatrix Lestrange's vault, how they planned the robbery for weeks, how Tonks impersonated Bellatrix and tricked the goblins into letting her, Lupin, and James into the vault, from where they managed to retrieve the Horcrux and destroy it, even though Tonks and Lupin were captured and imprisoned by Lucius Malfoy. "How did you get away from there?" Ron asked, when it seemed they were about to end the story without explaining how Tonks and Lupin escaped from Malfoy Manor. Everyone looked at Lupin. He looked uncomfortable, but explained, "After a few days, the full moon came. Breaking metal bars is like cutting through butter for a werewolf." Ron made a sound of understanding, looking at Tonks. "Sarthet show you." Hermione elbowed him in the ribs hard, silencing him. "How you what?" Harry asked, even though everyone looked a little uncomfortable. "How I became a werewolf myself," Tonks explained calmly. Lupin looked as if the words pained him, and Tonks placed her hand on his clenched fist, causing him to relax slightly. For the first time, Harry noticed they were sitting very close. "Wait," Emily suddenly interrupted. "So the diadem that Margaret, Jenna, and I found at Hogwarts, was that a Horcrux too? Is that what Professor Dumbledore meant when he said it belonged to Voldemort?" "That's right," his mother said sadly. "The last thing we wanted was for you to have to deal with something like that. I wish we had known the diadem was at Hogwarts. We could have saved a lot of trouble and pain for everyone." "So the diary, the locket, the cup, and the diadem, those are 4 Horcruxes." Hermione listed the 4 objects. "You said you destroyed 6, so what were the other 2? "Another Horcrux was a ring that belonged to Voldemort's mother's family," Harry's father explained. "Dumbledore destroyed it himself, but not before he got affected by a curse that Voldemort placed on it, which almost killed him. That's what made his arm turn black. The 6th Horcrux was Voldemort's snake. Ginny took good care of it when we came to rescue her." He probably shouldn't have said what he did, because his wife gave him a strange look, and he, in turn, looked at Harry with concern. "Where did you rescue her from?" Harry asked, confused. Everyone suddenly looked nervous. His father stammered, You, you said you remembered everything. He didn't say he remembered everything, his wife scolded him. But Harry was no longer listening, because the truth was he really did remember everything. He just preferred not to think about it, until Ginny's name came up and flooded everything back. He felt as if the blood was draining from his limbs. Suddenly the sun was very dazzling, and the bright summer day felt strange, unreal. "Where's the loo?" he found himself asking. Someone directed him, and he got up and walked in a daze, as if his body and mind were not connected. He went into a bathroom on the ground floor, closing the door behind him. Not able to hold himself together 1 second longer, he ran to the sink and vomited. There was no trace left of the sweet mist that had swaddled him since he woke up. There was no trace left of the exaltation that had flooded him following the reunion with his friends. A feeling of burning disgust and hatred overcame him, and a memory of Ginny, pale and listless, wearing an ugly velvet robe, was seared into the back of his eyes and wouldn't let go. Tears rolled down his face, unable to wash away the memories of what he had done, until the self-loathing soured and turned into uncontrolled rage. He slammed his fist into the mirror above the sink and was glad for the intense pain in his injured hand. A knock on the bathroom door startled and angered him. "Harry, are you all right?" His mother's worried voice was heard from the other side. "I'm fine," he shouted in reply, and sank to sit on the cold floor, holding his hand that throbbed with pain, enjoying seeing blood run from the fresh cuts. He didn't remember the last time he had cried, really cried. Certainly not since he was a very small child in the darkness of the cupboard under the stairs. Now he was crying for all the lives he had ruined. He remembered them all, remembered their eyes before he killed them. Percy, Snape, Dumbledore, the countless other people he killed without a second thought. He remembered the hatred and revulsion in Ginny's eyes. He remembered Ron and Hermione hugging him and being happy to see him despite everything he had done, and he couldn't bear it. He buried his head between his knees and continued to press on his hand, which must have been broken by now, because he was afraid that if he stopped feeling pain, he would be sucked into an abyss filled with the gazes of the people he had murdered. The day progressed while he sat there, sinking into rage and guilt. Specks of dust swirled in the air in the midday sun, and he thought of Dumbledore, fragile and sad, crumbling into dust and carried away by the wind. And he hated himself for spending all the time since the graveyard last June being angry with him. Finally, after long hours, a knock was heard on the door again, and it opened carefully. He was unaware that the door was unlocked, and that the only thing separating him from the rest of the family was their respect for the fact that he wanted to suffer alone. "You have a visitor," his mother said to him gently. "Come." Too exhausted to argue, Harry got up from the floor and followed her in silence. In the living room sat a woman in her 50s, wearing a light green robe and cloak. On the lapel of the cloak was an emblem of a crossed bone and wand. At first glance, she looked very familiar to Harry, but he couldn't pinpoint exactly why. She had thick dark hair and her brown eyes had long black eyelashes. "Harry, this is Andromeda Tonks." Harry's mother introduced him to the guest, who rose to her feet and immediately began to examine his injured hand with a cool, soft hand, without asking for his consent. "She's the healer who has been treating you since you came home." "It's nice to finally meet you," the healer said kindly. She took out her wand and pointed it at his hand. A painful current passed through his broken bones and then disappeared, erasing the cuts and leaving his hand as it was. "You can call me Andy." "Are you?" Harry stammered, trying to figure out where he knew her from. "The mother of the notorious Nymphadora," Andromeda replied wittily, as if she knew exactly what was going through his mind, and added in a more serious tone, "And Bellatrix's sister, may she rest in peace." "Do you need anything else, Andy?" Harry's mother asked the healer, who had returned to sit in her armchair and gestured for Harry to sit on the sofa opposite her. "Nothing, Lily, but I'd like to talk to Harry alone." Lily gave Harry a comforting smile and left the room, unable to hide the fact that she was worried. Harry couldn't really blame her. "I imagine you understand why your parents called me," Andromeda asked him. "I can guess," Harry replied bitterly, not meeting the healer's gaze. "The experience you went through was particularly traumatic," she told him. "Physically, you are completely healthy, but the mind is a more complex thing. It may be years before we know the full extent of the impact this period had on you. It's also possible we'll never know. Please hand me my bag." It took Harry a moment to realize she was talking about the old leather bag on the floor next to the sofa. He picked it up. It felt incredibly light for its size, and handed it to the healer. When she opened it, Harry noticed it was full of glass vials and powders of various kinds. "I don't want to drink any potions," he stated immediately, thinking of the numbing fog that had filled his head when he woke up. "Why not?" Andromeda inquired, nonetheless taking 2 vials out of the bag and placing them on the table. They were both small and round, one filled with a dark liquid and one with a pearly white one. Harry remained silent. "Perhaps you feel that you need to be punished in some way for what you know who did to you, and feeling guilt and self-loathing would be a fitting punishment," Andromeda suggested, as if it were an obvious answer, and Harry realized she knew what he was feeling better than he could explain even to himself. "If that's the case, put your mind at ease. This treatment will not make you forget what happened, and it will not erase what you feel. But if you're going to continue to develop like a normal teenager, you'll need to be able to keep your meals down and get a decent night's sleep. That's what these potions will help you do. I'll leave you and your parents written instructions on how to take them." Harry stared at the 2 vials on the table, feeling a vague sense of despair. "As I started to say," Andromeda continued, "the mind is a complex and difficult thing to heal. There are healers who have developed magical techniques that are supposed to help heal the mind, but the truth is that all they do is exactly what you fear. They make the patient forget the trauma, and the price of forgetfulness is indifference and detachment. I don't believe in using these methods. In fact, I believe that in this case, the Muggles are wiser than us wizards." "You're talking about going to a psychologist?" Harry asked, thinking of Uncle Vernon and his long speeches about how psychologists were just charlatans who stole money from weak-willed people. "You don't have to sound so scared," Andromeda replied, causing Harry to feel a spark of anger. "No, I find it hard to believe that your parents would be able to find a Muggle you could honestly share what you've been through with. But I do think you need to talk about what has happened to you openly and honestly, and as early as possible. Is there someone you feel you can talk to?" Harry immediately thought of Ron and Hermione, and nodded. With that, Andromeda ended their meeting, announcing that she would come to check on him weekly. Chapter 59. The Family Who Lived. Over the following days, Harry made an effort to follow Andromeda Tonks's advice and share what he had been through since Christmas with Ron and Hermione. At first, he found it difficult to put into words, but he soon felt at ease and free to talk to them, just like in their thousands of conversations around Hogwarts or in Ron's room at the Burrow. His friends came to visit almost every day, and they would go for long walks along the coastline, no matter the weather. Harry told them about the dream world he had lived in for months, where he experienced the same day over and over, while also being vaguely aware of what was happening in reality and of Voldemort's actions. He told them how, when he finally managed to escape the dream after his mother confronted Voldemort, he had surrounded himself with a world of his own, with a Hogwarts-like setting, and that they had been there with him while he watched from the sidelines as Voldemort used his body to do terrible things. Finally, he described how he had defeated Voldemort with his mother's help, and tried to explain the feeling that Voldemort would always be a part of him, as long as he was alive. "Do you think he'll ever come back?" Hermione asked him one day as the 3 of them lay on the grey sand in the early evening, watching the waves. "If you say he's still there, what's to stop him from taking over you again?" "Not that anyone thinks you're about to turn back into Voldemort any second," Ron added, trying to balance the tension of the fateful question. He's weak, Harry explained. He didn't even have to think to answer. He just knew. He's only a seventh of the wizard he was at his peak, after all. And also what? Hermione asked when he fell silent and started drawing patterns in the sand. He didn't reply. He knew Andromeda said he needed to talk about what he went through honestly, but there was one part he wasn't sure he was ready to share with his friends yet. You're mine. You have always been mine. Nothing, he said at last, deciding to change the subject. What did you two get up to while I was away? Well, the truth is, Hermione started, looking a little embarrassed. For some reason, Ron's ears turned bright red, and he seemed fascinated by a seashell he had found in the sand. A lot of pretty awful things happened, with you and Ginny, and then Percy. It turned out that Ron and I got a lot closer. We're together now, Ron blurted out suddenly, as if he couldn't keep the secret any longer. Then he added, less confidently, we hope you're all right with it. For a moment, Harry felt surprised, but he immediately realized there was no reason to feel that way. I'm happy for you, he said, smiling at his friends. I really am. At least something good came out of all this. He tried to make it sound like it was no big deal as he added, I guess I'll have to find new partners for Hogsmeade weekends next year. Don't be an idiot, Ron said, his ears burning up again. The seashell he had found must have been really interesting because he wouldn't stop looking at it. Maybe the three of us could go with Ginny or something. That could be nice. Harry had dreaded this moment for many reasons. A knot twisted in his stomach at the sound of Ginny's name. Look, I'm sorry I didn't tell you about us, he said to his friend, glad he still wasn't looking at him. I don't really have an excuse. I was a rubbish friend. Ron shook his head. I get why you didn't tell me. I wouldn't have taken it well. I probably would have just ruined it for you. Ron, that's so emotionally mature of you, Hermione said proudly, touching his arm. Harry thought that if Ron kept blushing like this, his head would explode. Yeah, you've progressed from having the emotional range of a teaspoon to the emotional range of a fork, Harry said to ease the awkwardness. And to his surprise, it was Hermione who threw a handful of sand at him in response. To Harry's relief, the conversation moved on from Ginny to lighter topics. The Owls being postponed to next year because of the battle at Hogwarts, Fred and George's new joke shop, Bill's engagement, who was with none other than Fleur de Lacquer from the Triwizard Tournament, how Harry would need to catch up on all the classes he'd missed during the year, and who would be chosen to be the Gryffindor captain of Quidditch. Harry chatted and joked with his friends, and didn't reveal the fact that he had a lot of reservations about what his next school year at Hogwarts would look like. After dinner, Ron and Hermione returned to the burrow. Harry, his mother, and his sister spent the evening in the study, which was a corner room with large windows on the ground floor, where the portrait of Henry Potter that had been moved from the Potter family home was placed above the fireplace. Harry and Emily started a game of wizard chess on the rug in front of the fireplace, where a low, warm flame burned against the cool night, while their mother worked on the curriculum for the defense against the dark arts class for the next year at the desk at the end of the room. Henry Potter watched his great-grandchildren play, giving them advice from time to time, and after a while he fell asleep with his head slumped on his shoulder. Around 8 o'clock, a tall green flame lit up in the fireplace. Harry's father stepped into the study, yawning widely, and collapsed into a nearby armchair. He brushed off a memo that had managed to follow him from the ministry and unbuttoned the top button of his wizard's robe. Dinner's in the oven, his wife told him after she went to greet him with a kiss. I already ate, he replied and yawned again. I just came for a few hours. I'll have to go back to the ministry tonight. Your turn, Emily told Harry, but he ignored her, looking at his father. Do the trials last all night? He asked him. For a brief moment, his father looked surprised by the question, and then he said, I thought you weren't reading the Daily Prophet anymore. I'm not, but Hermione is. She read that the Wisengamot is going to try everyone accused of supporting Voldemort today. Unfortunately, that's an event that will take much more than one day. There are a lot of defendants, and each one needs to be given the opportunity to defend themselves and bring witnesses. There are cases where the sentence is very clear, like in the case of Lucius Malfoy. Everyone who was at the battle at Hogwarts saw him doing Voldemort's bidding willingly, but not everyone is like that. We don't want what happened to Sirius in the last war to repeat itself, and for people to go to Azkaban just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. So I'm going to spend a lot more nights away from home until this is all behind us. Harry pondered his father's words as he moved his knight to the other side of the board. "What's the matter, Harry?" his mother suddenly asked him. She was sitting on the armrest of the armchair his father was in and observing his behavior. Knowing that he couldn't really hide anything from her, he said, "My testimony could put a lot of Death Eaters in Azkaban." His parents exchanged glances. He had already learned to recognize those looks. He had hit a sore spot. "Your dad suggested to the Wisengamot that they call you to testify," Lily admitted tensely. "Not everyone agreed that it was admissible, but the majority agreed to summon you to hear what you had to say on the matter, but I refused that he should ask you to come." "I'm sorry I didn't ask you. I just wanted to." "It's all right," Harry said before she could apologize, making another move on the chessboard without paying attention to what he was doing. "I'm not sure I want to do it anyway. It will be bad enough when I go back to Hogwarts in September, and everyone thinks I'm Voldemort in disguise or something. I don't need any more attention." As he expected, this comment made the atmosphere in the room tense. Emily took one of his pawns only for his rook to violently knock her bishop off the board. "I talked to a lot of people at the ministry," his dad told him. "The general consensus is that we're telling the truth, and you were just a victim of Voldemort, even though it outwardly seemed like you were the one who did all those things at the battle at Hogwarts. Everyone who was captured in the battle and saw what happened when Voldemort left, you finds it hard to believe that it was an act. Besides the fact that it's hard to believe that a 15-year-old could have done the things he did there, like neutralize the Hogwarts defenses. So no one really thinks it was your fault in any way." "Not really." "You said that no one really thinks it was my fault," Harry said, advancing his queen. "Does that mean there are people who act like they do think it was my fault?" "You're very observant," his father said, in that annoying manner Harry had noticed he used to evade questions. "Were you always like that?" "Yes, and you didn't answer my question." "Well, it's just like with Fudge and Umbridge last year. It's a lot less scary to believe that Voldemort never really came back, and that maybe all the things that happened in the last few months weren't as awful as everyone remembers," James said, and it annoyed Harry that he hadn't really answered his question. "Give it a few months, and it'll be forgotten." "How did you do that?" Emily complained. Harry realized his queen had trapped her king in the corner of the board. "Since when did you get good at chess?" "I'm not. It was a fluke," he muttered. After a few minutes, he found an excuse to go to his room. Despite everything that had happened, Harry could say without a shadow of a doubt that that summer had been the happiest time of his life so far, even more so than his school years at Hogwarts. Life with his family was completely different from his life with the Dursleys. Harry's mother didn't spend her days cleaning the house and gossiping about the neighbors. They didn't really have any, but rather enjoyed reading the many books that filled the house, challenging herself to brew complex potions in the pantry or tending to the magical plants in the garden. His father tried to spend as little time as possible at the ministry and as much time at home with his wife and children, even though his job was more important than anything Uncle Vernon had ever done at his drill company. They almost always had guests, whether it was Ron and Hermione, Emily's friends from school, or Sirius, Lupin, and Tonks, and Harry never had to go to his room and pretend he didn't exist. At the same time, everyone always knew to respect his need to be alone sometimes. He spent the summer days flying and playing Quidditch in the back garden with Emily, Margaret, and Jenna, and with Ron, while Hermione was absorbed in a book on the lawn or helping Harry's mother with the magical plants growing in the garden. On weekends and in the evenings, his father would join them for games, and Harry took great pleasure in defeating him. Sirius, who had moved into a flat in London, was a regular guest at the Potter household. On Harry's birthday, when he insisted he didn't want the event to be a big deal, Sirius took him to visit the nearby village. They walked there all day while Snuffles, the black puppy Sirius had adopted to keep him company, ran around them and wagged his tail. In the evening, they went into the village pub, and Sirius let him try some beer, after swearing him to secrecy not to tell his mother. To Harry's surprise, he quite enjoyed the drink. After managing to finish half of the glass, while Snuffles napped at their feet under the table, he dared to talk to Sirius about Ginny. "You'll have to face her sometime," his godfather told him after he told him that his fear of meeting Ginny again made facing dragons and basilisks feel like a children's game. "She's Ron's sister. You can't avoid her forever. Besides, it's better to clear the air as soon as possible." "I know," Harry replied heavily, staring into the amber liquid in the glass. "It's just that if she looks at me the way she used to look at them," the vague memory made his stomach turn over. "I don't know what I'll do. She probably hates me." "I don't think she hates you," Sirius told him sympathetically. "She knows it wasn't really you." Harry thought that knowing he wasn't Voldemort wouldn't stop Ginny from thinking about him every time she saw him. "Do you still want to be with her?" "Yes," Harry replied without hesitation, feeling a sharp pain in his chest. "But I have a feeling it's not going to happen." "There'll be other girls," Sirius comforted him. Harry appreciated his attempt to cheer him up, but it didn't help to get rid of the crushing sense of despair at the thought that if Ginny wanted any kind of connection with him, she would have at least written to him or sent a message with Ron and Hermione. In the days that had passed since he had woken up, Harry had noticed that something in him had changed. He thought he noticed things he would have never noticed before, and that sometimes he was good at things he used to be very bad at, like chess. The thoughts he had during the day and the thoughts he had at night were also very different from each other. Maybe it was because during the day he was surrounded by his family and friends, and his mother always made sure he drank the potions Andromeda had left for him, while at night he was alone in his room, sometimes sitting awake for hours while the rest of the household slept. The potions he drank regularly were like a candle in the darkness inside his head. As Andromeda had promised him, they couldn't make it stop existing, but they helped to disperse the storm clouds of his intense emotions and allowed him to see clearly all the people he loved around him, to be grateful for the fact that he had everything he had ever dreamed of having and more. But at night, when he was alone, he dared to let the light of that candle almost completely die out so that he could look into the darkness and reflect. At night, he had a different perspective on what he had gone through. It wasn't that he had stopped feeling the guilt that gnawed at him throughout the day. He didn't think he would ever be able to stop feeling it. But when he managed to push it aside for a moment, he could concentrate and see a bigger picture, something he had never been able to do before in his life. He could see beyond his short 16 years, beyond the tragic events of his first years at Hogwarts, beyond his childhood with the Dursleys, beyond the fateful night he lost his parents decades back into someone else's life. A life that could have been his if his early life had been even slightly different. "You're mine. You have always been mine." He thought a lot about the things he saw after he had escaped from Voldemort's dream prison. These were Voldemort's memories, from his childhood and from the time before his first defeat. It was one of the only things he hadn't shared with anyone, not even with Ron and Hermione. He felt that if he told anyone about it, the memories would be somehow tainted before he could decipher their meaning. And he had to decipher their meaning. He knew without a doubt that he had seen them for a reason. There was a reason he had found those specific memories out of a lifetime of memories. They had something to do with the reason he and his parents survived the killing curse, but he didn't yet know why or how. In the small hours of the night, when there was no one to ask him what he was thinking about, he could admit the strange truth that he didn't hate Voldemort for what he had done to him. He didn't even really resent him. In some strange place in his heart, he loved him. Not like he loved his friends and his family, but carefully, in a reserved way, a little like he loved himself. In the first week of August, the Wisengamot sent the last convicted Death Eater to Azkaban and prepared to elect a new minister for magic and fix the damage Voldemort's takeover had done to the ministry. Harry's father got a much-needed holiday after long weeks of hard work and decided it was time to do something he hadn't had the chance to do 15 years before, celebrate the end of the war. One sunny day in mid-August, the house and garden were filled with members of the Order and their families. Harry tried to remember if he had ever been present at such an event, which was very reminiscent of the party his parents had held in the recurring dream he had lived in for a few months, and realized that it was the biggest social event he had ever been to. The Dursleys never had parties, except for the lavish and obnoxious dinner parties they used to hold for Uncle Vernon's business partners. This event was not like them in any way. No one was dressed up, and the guests moved freely in the living room, and garden as trays laden with drinks and food floated around them. James and Emily seemed very comfortable with the situation, so Harry was glad that it at least seemed that his mother also felt only slightly less embarrassed than him to be surrounded by so many smiling people, and in their own house at that. "Wother, Harry," Tonks called out to him as she appeared among the first guests with an older wizard and witch. "You know my parents, right? We've met, although Harry probably didn't think I existed outside of my role as a healer," Andromeda Tonks, who looked very different in an airy dress, and without her St. Mungo's healer robes, said wittily at the look of surprise on Harry's face. "Harry, this is my husband, Ted." Harry shook the hand of Tonks's father, who was a kind and friendly-looking man, from whom Tonks had undoubtedly inherited her sociable nature. At that moment, Sirius appeared and pulled Andy into a bone-crushing hug, allowing Harry to slip away from the conversation. He intended to slip inside to get a moment's peace from the commotion, but at that moment, the Weasleys and Hermione appeared. Harry hadn't gone to see any of the family besides Ron yet. The reason for that was clear to him, and the thing he dreaded most happened the moment he saw Mrs. Weasley carrying a large pie and Mr. Weasley beside her. He felt a crushing sense of guilt. Mrs. Weasley noticed him before he had a chance to think about what to do. She thrust the pie into Ron's hands and went straight to Harry. He hated himself when he noticed how much she had lost weight and that her round face was etched with fresh wrinkles, but the smile she gave him was warm, her eyes full of tears of relief and love. She gave him a strong, motherly hug that was so sincere that he knew she didn't hate him or blame him for her son's death or the trauma her daughter endured. "Oh, Harry, we were so worried about you," she told him while hugging him. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Weasley," he said in a choked voice. "It wasn't your fault. Do you hear me?" Mrs. Weasley scolded him, looking him straight in the eye. He nodded at her with a lump in his throat and tried to convince himself that she was right. The rest of the family surrounded him with smiles and handshakes right after. Fred and George, dressed in colorful robes with their Sharps emblem, patted him on the shoulder affectionately, and Bill, who appeared there with Fleur de Lacquer, shook his hand warmly before his fiancée surprised him with a hug. "Mr. Weasley shook Harry's hand with sparkling eyes and said how happy he was that he was safe and sound. After a few moments of conversation, Harry felt relieved when the Weasleys dispersed to talk to the other guests at the party. But the relief was immediately replaced by a feeling of dread. Until now, Ginny had been hiding behind her family members, but now they were left alone. "Hi," Harry blurted out, and felt relieved when his voice didn't crack. "Hi," Ginny replied quietly, without making eye contact with him. He immediately noticed that she had cut her hair in a very short barb. He hated it. He loved it when her hair was long and lush. "Can we talk alone?" It didn't look like anyone was going to stop them, so Harry led her into the house. He wanted them to talk in the study, where at least the portrait of Henry Potter could bear witness, but from the noises coming from there, it seemed that his father was hosting in there as well. "Where's your room?" Ginny asked. "Upstairs," Harry replied tensely. Before he had a chance to ask if it was all right for her to be alone with him in his room, she found the stairs and started to climb them. He walked after her. By the time he reached the second floor, she had already found his room and entered without asking for permission, examining the space uncomfortably. For the first time, Harry noticed that his room was very bare. It was much larger than the room he had at the Dursleys, and it had no objects other than a bed, a wardrobe, a desk on which Hedwig's cage stood, the firebolt leaning against the wall, a single poster of the Chudley cannons that Ron had given him as a gift, and a bookshelf that held about a dozen books and a few souvenirs. Harry remained standing in the doorway, watching Ginny as she examined his souvenirs. There was the carved flute he had received as a gift from Hagrid in his first year, which he had used to put Fluffy to sleep when he, Ron, and Hermione had gone to look for the Philosopher's Stone. The sneakoscope Ron had brought him from Egypt in the summer before their third year. The miniature model of the Hungarian Horntail from the first task of the Triwizard Tournament, and the snitch with his initials on it that he had received as a birthday gift from his parents a year earlier. "Can I close the door?" Harry asked her, when it seemed she was going to continue looking at his belongings for a long time. "Of course," Ginny replied, sounding annoyed. "What do you think is going to happen?" "Nothing," Harry replied angrily, slamming the door. "I just wanted you to feel comfortable." "I'm not afraid of you," Ginny retorted, also angrily. Harry wanted to tell her that it certainly didn't look that way. She was standing with tense shoulders and clenched fists as if she was preparing for a fight. But he decided to hold back, the sight making him feel sick. He walked to the desk and leaned on it next to the sleeping Hedwig. "Look," he started when she just went to the window and looked out at the party in the garden. She was carrying a rucksack with the emblem of the Harpies Quidditch team, but she hadn't taken it off her back. "I'm sorry about Percy and about everything that happened." "Thanks," Ginny said, in a way that made it clear that this apology didn't help her at all. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure," Harry replied, sounding braver than he felt. He knew what she wanted to ask. It was what everyone wanted to know. "Were you aware of what was happening?" "Not at first," he replied. For a moment, he was tempted to tell her about the dream Voldemort had made him live so that he wouldn't notice what was happening. The dream where his life was wonderful and he and she were so happy together. But he immediately realized that it was childish and foolish and decided to keep the information to himself. "When did you become aware?" Ginny continued to question him determinedly. She looked at him directly and stubbornly, as if she was forcing herself not to look away. "Were you aware when he murdered Percy?" "Yes," he replied, also refusing to lower his gaze. She didn't see that his fists were so tightly clenched in his pockets that his fingernails were cutting into his palms. She didn't know that the look in the eyes of the young man he had spent many summer holidays with, someone who was almost like a brother to him, haunted Harry every night along with the last spark in Dumbledore's eyes and the glittering dust that was carried away from the top of the astronomy tower. He wasn't sure what he expected her reaction to be, maybe that she would scream at him in rage or start crying. He certainly didn't expect her gaze to soften. "They said he was a hero," she said, and for the first time there was a slight tremor in her voice. "They said he stood up to Voldemort while everyone else didn't even dare to look at him." "That's right," Harry said. He remembered those moments very well. "What did he say? Tell me exactly. I know you remember." She was right. He remembered every single word. "Voldemort offered him to become a Death Eater," Harry told her, not sparing any details. He knew a lot about him because he worked for Fudge, and Death Eaters had collected information on senior ministry employees who could be incited. They were always looking for more candidates, especially wizards who seemed particularly ambitious or resentful, and Voldemort had something to tempt them with. But Percy refused him. He didn't even think about it for a second. He called Voldemort a tyrant. And then he fell silent, letting the silence fill in the blanks. To his relief, despite the sensitive and painful topic, it seemed that his words had managed to break the ice between him and Ginny a little. She sat down on his bed and for the first time took off her rucksack. She opened it and took out a glass sphere full of enchanted snow that contained a miniature model of the burrow, the gift he had given her last Christmas. "I want to give this back to you," she said. "No way," Harry said immediately, trying to hide the anger that had risen in him again. "It was a gift." "It doesn't have to be forever," Ginny said calmly, surprising him. "Just for a while. Every time I look at it, I think of Christmas and of you, but I need to move on." The meaning of her words was painfully clear, even though she didn't say it explicitly. Harry would have preferred her to get angry at him, to shout, to throw his gift at him. The calmness and maturity with which she spoke made it clear that she had made this decision a long time ago, and that there was nothing he could do to change her mind. Without saying a word, he went to the drawer of his bedside table. Inside it lay only 3 items: his wand next to its twin, Voldemort's wand, and the handkerchief embroidered with snitches and dragons that Ginny had given him as a gift at Christmas. He held it out to her. He didn't know why he expected her to refuse to take it, but she didn't. She got up and approached him, placing the glass sphere in his hand and taking the handkerchief. The same handkerchief that had rested in Voldemort's pocket throughout that year, and was still there when he was defeated at the Battle of Hogwarts. "Bye, Harry," she said. There was something very final about this simple statement, even though he knew they would continue to see each other later that day, and in the future at the Burrow, in the Gryffindor common room, and at Quidditch practice. "Bye," he replied, not looking at her as she left the room. He stood motionless for a few moments, listening to the sound of her footsteps on the stairs and the sounds of conversation and laughter carried from the garden. Only when he was sure she was out of earshot did he throw the glass sphere against the wall in a rage. He felt momentary satisfaction at the sound of the loud crash and the sight of the glass and enchanted snowflakes that flew from the point of impact, but the feeling was almost immediately replaced by deep regret. He was filled with a deep sense of self-hatred and uncontrolled anger towards Ginny. The emotions were so strong that they were paralyzing. He could barely breathe. In his helplessness, he remembered the technique Andromeda had taught him in one of her last visits, which was meant to help him control his intense emotions. He sank to the floor with his back to his bed and began to count in his head all the things he could see, hear, and feel around him. The soft fibers of the rug, Hedwig hooting in her sleep, the gleaming firebolt, the sunny day outside, and the voices of all the people he loved. After a few moments, he felt calmer, and his breathing slowly returned to a normal rhythm. The storm clouds in his head had dispersed a little. In a moment of clarity, he held out his hand with intention. The pieces of glass and enchanted snow rose from the floor and fused back into the sphere that contained the model of the burrow, which now rested in his hand, whole and undamaged, as if it had never broken. He remembered Ginny had said that one day she would come back for her gift, so he had to keep it safe until that day. He didn't know how long he had been sitting there looking at the snow falling on the burrow when there was a gentle knock on his door. Recognizing that it was his mother, he told her to come in. "I saw Ginny coming down the stairs," she told him with a sensitive smile. "Are you all right?" Harry suppressed the urge to find out if his mother had perhaps seen Ginny crying, and just nodded. "Can you come down to the study? We want to talk to you." Harry placed Ginny's gift on the bed and followed his mother to the study on the ground floor. When she said they wanted to talk to him, he assumed she meant her and his father. He didn't expect to also find McGonagall waiting for him there. McGonagall was sitting in one of the comfortable armchairs in front of the empty fireplace in a thick, checkered dress that didn't suit the warm weather, and when Harry entered, she gave him a rare, reserved smile that surprised him. Harry's father was leaning on the mantelpiece with a bottle of butterbeer, dressed in everyday clothes that made him look completely different from the formal McGonagall. "Hello, Harry," McGonagall said to him. He tried to remember if she had ever called him by his first name before. Using students' first names was something only Dumbledore used to do. "Hi," Harry replied uncertainly, his gaze moving between everyone present. "Did something happen?" "Nothing happened," his mother reassured him, directing him to sit on the sofa opposite McGonagall's seat, and sat down next to him. "We want to talk to you about the upcoming school year," McGonagall began. "As you might have guessed, I will be taking over the role as head mistress this year, as Albus is no longer with us. Your father is present in this conversation as the head of the Order of the Phoenix." The last part of the sentence made it clear to Harry exactly what this conversation was going to be about. His father sipped his butterbeer and managed to look incredibly at ease in the situation. Harry knew that despite Voldemort's defeat, the Order had not yet disbanded, and used to gather once a week at the old Potter household to keep up to date with the actions of Death Eaters who had not yet been caught or brought to justice, to ensure that they would not take advantage of the Ministry's weakened state to evade punishment. "So you want to know if I'm going to be a danger to the other students at Hogwarts?" Harry got straight to the point, saving the adults from beating around the bush. "You want to know that it was really the end of Voldemort, and that there's no chance he'll come back?" McGonagall looked surprised by his directness. "A few weeks ago, you told us you thought a part of Voldemort would always live inside you," James said. "We're just wondering what that actually means." Harry hesitated before answering. He had asked himself that question many times throughout the summer, and when he had come to an answer, he had chosen not to share it with anyone. He didn't know how to explain himself in a way he thought anyone could understand. He himself barely understood it. "I have his memories," he began, fixing his eyes on the rug. "Not all of them. Well, no one remembers all of their own memories, but I think I remember the significant ones." He fell silent and waited. When no one reacted, he felt confident enough to continue. "But it's not just memories. I know things he knew. I can do things he did." He fell silent again, waiting for some reaction to this fateful statement, but none came. "It has to be because of the Horcrux." James was the first to speak, seeming to attempt to make the situation appear less dire than it was. "Before he passed, Dumbledore told us that this Horcrux in you was key to the possession and your Parseltongue abilities. So now, when it's the only part of him left, you contain everything that's left of him." "Yeah," Harry replied shortly, deciding not to elaborate on his thoughts on the topic. "There's something else, isn't there?" his mother asked softly, sensing he was holding something back. Harry would have preferred to keep these thoughts to himself, but under his mother's worried gaze, his resolve cracked. "We're also connected in some other way," he said. "I don't understand exactly how or why. The Horcrux was certainly what enabled the possession, but there's more. I think we were connected long before the night he tried to kill us." As he expected, the adults in the room received his conclusion with a grim, tense silence. "If I may," a new voice entered the conversation. The portrait of Henry Potter, who had so far listened to the conversation in complete silence from his place above the fireplace, was the one who spoke. "Perhaps I see the situation from a slightly different angle. It's just easier when you see everything from the wall, without really being affected by the events. In my opinion, the things Harry is saying shed new light on the past, and especially on the night when you, James, and your wife were supposed to meet your end." "How?" James asked his grandfather with interest. "Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think anyone has yet managed to provide an explanation for how you survived." "We already established that Lily saved us," James told him. "She was the one who defeated Voldemort the first time when he came for Harry." "Yes, but what about you?" his grandfather asked him, a businesslike and slightly mischievous twinkle in his eyes. "What about me?" "You were supposed to die," Lily said seriously. It was clear that she had pondered the question herself before. "He only came to me after he had killed you. It's clear how Harry and I survived, but who saved you?" James had no answer. Harry didn't think he had ever seen him speechless. "What's your theory, Mr. Potter?" McGonagall asked the portrait. "I'm thinking about the evening when my grandson returned from a terrifying encounter with Voldemort, during which Voldemort intended to kill him and his friends, leaving only Lily alive. Afterwards, it turned out that despite aiming the killing curse at 4 people, none of them died. That day you told me, James, that your friend Remus had a theory that the killing curse didn't work because Harry, who was probably a large part of Voldemort, even though it wasn't apparent on the surface, was unable to allow his father and his friends to be murdered. Do you see where I'm going with this? You can't possibly be trying to say what I think you are, McGonagall said, with a raised eyebrow, almost as if she was challenging a student's answer in class. Are you saying that after killing dozens of people in cold blood and ordering the killings of many more, Voldemort was not able to cast the killing curse on the Potters because he felt something for them? Love. Remorse. Why would he feel these things for them after years of senseless violence? Is that really such a strange idea? Henry Potter wondered. After everything that has happened in the last year. The adults in the room didn't look like they were ready to accept this preposterous idea. The only one who seemed to be seriously considering the possibility was Harry's mother. "I think he's right," he said, surprising everyone. "It's a bit hard to understand, but I think it's true. Listen," he continued in the face of the doubt on his father's face, then paused, thinking about how to put into words what he felt and knew intuitively. The idea that had been twinkling at the back of his head all summer and that he had reflected on every night. "You're mine. You have always been mine. No one knows where prophecies come from, right?" He attempted to explain his view. "One can argue what their meaning is and if they're bound to be fulfilled, but the truth is they exist, and they're important enough for the Department of Mysteries to research them. So maybe there's a reason behind the prophecy about Voldemort. Maybe it wasn't by chance that the child it spoke about was me. Maybe it couldn't have been anyone else, because prophecies come from the same place as the connection between me and Voldemort." He looked at those around him. They couldn't understand what he was talking about, and he didn't blame them. "I think I understand what you're saying." As always, Harry's mother was the one who understood him better than anyone. "I think it's the most logical explanation I've heard so far." "I suppose we'll never really know," Harry's father concluded, clearly struggling to agree with the strange explanation. "It's not for us to decipher the mysteries of magic. That's what my mum used to say. But it doesn't really matter, does it? What's important is that we're all safe and sound, and the war is behind us, right?" Harry completely agreed with him. It didn't really matter what other people thought. He knew the truth, no matter how strange and unexplainable it was. "If we could go back to the topic of Harry's next school year," McGonagall changed the subject, glancing at her watch. "I hope you understand that your mother and the other teachers at Hogwarts will be asked to be especially vigilant about you this year, for any sign of strange behavior that might indicate that Voldemort is raising his head again." "I understand," Harry said. A year or less ago, such a statement would have annoyed him, made him think they didn't trust him. Today he was mature enough to understand that it was necessary. "In addition, you will be required to catch up on the classes you missed last year, in preparation for the owls that will take place at the end of the first semester." McGonagall continued seriously, as if his academic future was a topic no less fateful than the connection between him and Voldemort. "I think I'll be fine," Harry replied confidently, not elaborating on the topic he had raised at the beginning of the conversation, that he knew what Voldemort knew and could do things he did, and that included passing the owls without any difficulty. On that note, the meeting ended. McGonagall left through the fireplace in the study, and Harry and his parents went back to the party. They went out to the garden together, and Harry couldn't shake the feeling that he was dreaming. He was in his family's house, his home, with his parents and sister. In the garden, Harry was reunited with Ron and Hermione, who were chatting happily with Tonks and Lupin. They greeted him with smiles, and didn't mention the fact that he had gone with Ginny and disappeared for a long time. Ginny herself was standing in a distant spot with Fred and George, who seemed to be deep in serious conversation with Mundungus, Fletcher, and Sirius, and he forced himself not to look in her direction. He laughed sincerely at a silly joke Ron told, while Hermione smiled and rolled her eyes. He decided that this was the day he would start a new chapter in his life, without Voldemort, alongside his friends and family.